How you doing? Today we're here with another book review. As you may or may not know, about half a year ago, I reviewed Hell's Gulf, a book written by a YouTuber by the name of Nick Carlson who intrigued me last year with certain reviews that he made and certain interpretations of concepts that he came up with that made me eventually want to review his book. And now there is a prequel book of that very book in the name of The God Tide. So if you don't really know much about Hell's Gulf at all, I suggest probably not watching this video. And if you haven't read The God Tide either, I also suggest not watching this video because I am going to be discussing spoilers in maximum, because a lot of the things that I want to talk about requires me to discuss the spoiler aspect of it, and it allows me to get my point across a lot better this time around. Ain't that right, Greenie? So what exactly is The God Tide about? Well, The God Tide is about a man going on an adventure to find his lost child, going to a lost village and finding these strange villagers, all seemingly like monsters, before encountering some real monsters, a family of monsters that keep him captive, and one by one he has to pick them off until eventually getting to the mother, only to realize he himself too is a monster, and sacrifices himself to stop the mother monster. And
the MacMilitant coming to get it on.
Teddy's calling me up. Let me holler. Teddy, you're on speakerphone. What the hell is it?
I just wanted to inform you that the description of the story you just described is actually Resident Evil Village, which, in technicality, Resident Evil Village is almost the same as Resident Evil Biohazard.
What?
Which that is also taking a story from Resident Evil Revelations 2, which also, in a way, is inspired by Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but you get the picture.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah, better course correct that, player. Don't want no bad rep.
Yeah, I'll fix that right now. My mistake. So, The God Tide is actually about a guy by the name of Lance who goes to Hell's Gulf to search for a lost bird, and also maybe perhaps find a new path in life for himself. After all, he is a birdsman who can't exactly whistle, which begs the question why he did the job, which I guess, yeah, you can get the job, but if you can't do the job, how do you expect to actually get paid? Anywho, I digress. After going into Hell's Gulf, he encounters this family of monsters who claim him to be one of their own, and before they get a chance to chomp on him, some random tribe comes in and saves him, and there Lance gets to start his journey, taking out each of the monsters one by one by finding out their weakness until finally getting to the mother and stopping her once and for all. So, what exactly did I think of it? Well, I'm going to break it down into positives and negatives this time around to get more of my points across. I might still be able to forget things because I still don't write a script for these videos, but it is what it is. Plus, I literally just got finished reading the book, so I think at least I have some knowledge of the book, right? So to start off with the positives, my first positive is the fact that we get to have more monsters this time around. Now that we know the world of Hell's Gulf and that we understand how Hell's Gulf works, and we are waiting for the characters to figure that out, we get to actually explore the monsters of Hell's Gulf earlier on before they actually get to be a part of the story, unlike Hell's Gulf, because Hell's Gulf had to introduce the monsters, so now we get to enjoy the monsters. And definitely this time around, the whole Resident Evil Village style, which I don't even know if Nick Carlson based this off of Resident Evil. Nick, if you know about Resident Evil, maybe you should make a video. Resident Evil is really cool, man. And the fact that we get to have the monsters pose as a legitimate threat once again, with them each having their own style and way of fucking with the main protagonist, I really do enjoy. One fucks with reality, one is just a badass, and the other has cancer. And speaking of my positives, Captain Mulligan Taupe. Or Top, whatever. Holy shit. The second that I found out that this character was a pirate skeleton, I knew he was going to be my favorite, but I didn't know how much damage he could actually cause. And my goodness, I was so happy to see what carnage he could lay on people. He did not hesitate to absolutely massacre an entire village of people in such a brutal fashion too, almost in a way where I almost forgot what story I was reading. I forgot what kind of style of story that I was reading, to where I had a switch in my mind where I was kind of prepared for the typical Hollywood, you know, they're gonna cut away or not discuss that type of deal. But the second they started getting straight to the action, I had to flip that switch back. I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot, this shit is gonna be brutal, this shit is gonna be intense, it's gonna be serious. And indeed it was easily by a landslide, and when I say a landslide, I mean a steep ass cliff, the best part of this book, to the point where it almost almost doesn't compare to the rest of the book, but I'll discuss that a little bit later on. I actually had to play music while I was reading that part, and I was playing some Halloween Kills and Ends music, and they fucking lined up so perfectly to the scenes as I was reading them, and I was seeing how it was playing out. It was so awesome, man. Seeing all the bodies strung up, gutted, mutilated to fucking hell. You had people crawling pretty much on death's door. He had fucking line of dead bodies strung up, and he had some survivors, and unlike most villains, he was actually killing people off as Lance was not doing shit. He's like, oh, you're not gonna do it? Alright, you're gonna do something now? No? Okay. And he was just going in and in. Man, that boy did not fuck around, and he was easily the most badass part of this whole book. And the fact that he was only the second main villain kind of disappoints me a lot. It almost reminds me of something else that I know. And the fact that the story itself was building him up to be the most dangerous already by having other characters describe about Captain Mulligan Taupe already made him stand out and already was going to make him the best. And damn it, did Nick deliver. Holy shit, that was awesome, Nick. If you do more of that, you might just impress me a little bit more. If you do more of that, you might really get me onto these stories. Something I also want to praise is how the story is structured in a lot more cohesive manner to be able to understand where we are, what we're doing at all times. You have different scenes that are laid out as like 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to like I think 11 or something. You have the different days much more prominent and spelled out for you, and how the time moves makes more sense in terms of how all the things are playing out and how much time would realistically pass. I really enjoyed that aspect as well. Albeit I'm still not a big fan of it being in past tense because it's all happening in present. That's just a me thing, but I still very much enjoyed the story being a lot better to follow overall. Now on to my mixed aspects. Now the reason why these two are mixed aspects are because they more so apply to me, and necessarily I would put them realistically as negatives for my own personal viewing experience, but in terms of actually critiquing this book, I don't consider them as legitimate negatives to where it's like, okay, this is what makes the book worse. This is just a me thing, and only a me thing. The first of those mixed critiques is the constant concept of racism. Now, I'm probably one of the only few people in this world who really does not believe in racism. I don't believe in that concept. I don't think that that concept should be taken legitimately, because I think if you take the concept legitimately, then you embody exactly what the concept is. And it's a concept that really bores me whenever it's played in a story. Especially in this story, when they play the race card a lot with the whole Asian thing. It makes me wonder why we had to. Every time that I see it in a story, it makes me wonder if there is a legitimate reason as to why we have to play that card, why we have to play that concept, if that concept is worth it, or if that concept is legitimate enough to be told in that story format. And this is not one of those exceptions for me. This is one of those that was really just a boring cliche one. You know how it goes. Stereotypical white man doesn't really like this race, blah blah blah, and they don't really run the ball with that in any way or try to redeem that in any way. It's just the exact cliche kind of thing that I would expect for a concept like that. That really doesn't intrigue me at all. I kind of wish that if you were going to do that concept, Nick, that you could have at least did double perspective side of things, because that's kind of where I find it more interesting whenever we deal with concepts like this, is if we can get to see both sides of the perspective. When it's a one-sided thing, it gets a little too preachy for my liking and enjoyment. I can't even say it's preachy either. It's more of like a waste of time. To put it into equivalent example, right? If somebody came to my door to preach to me the gospel when I'm not religious, it's gonna bore me. It's not gonna appeal to me because I'm not religious. I don't believe in that. So it's like, it wouldn't intrigue me. So when I'm reading the book and that's like a concept that's being played throughout the entirety of the story, where Lance is this Asian person who is kind of sticking out from the rest, it doesn't appeal to me in any way. And every time that it's brought up, it really bores me because we could be focusing on Lance's actual character, which is something that I'm going to talk about later. Especially considering Lance himself can be very hypocritical at times. He's totally fine with this village of people that he has no idea who they are at first, calling him different names like Greenie, but the second somebody in the actual Hell's Gulf town calls him something, he gets very super sensitive and offended. And I don't necessarily like characters like that unless they actually, grow over time, which, as I said, I'm going to discuss with Lance's character later on. Especially when the fact that they are like picking on you is because you're actually related to the person in regards to the massacre. That especially, I think, makes Lance even more of a hypocrite, because now it's not even just because you're like Japanese dude, it's because you're legitimately the offspring of this person that they murdered. So obviously they would have a reason to look at you funny. You're literally related to somebody that they fucking murdered. It's like if you were in a mafia, you shot a hit on somebody, and then somebody comes along, is related to that person, and might be trying to take you out as well for what you did to that person. Obviously, you're going to be suspicious, and obviously, you're going to keep your guard up. They also dabble in some sexism here and there. Nothing too interesting. But I do respect the fact that for the character who is actually sexist, they actually have a backstory for him as to why he is that way, why he actually has the fear, which is exactly, you know, what these concepts are. They're based on fear. Because he birthed a deformed child that was essentially a cancer tumor cell, he ended up blaming the woman that birthed him, and that's why he ended up hating women. And I like the fact that they actually, you know, explored that with his backstory, rather than just be like, oh, you know, he's just sexist, with like what the rest of the characters are, where it's like, oh, they're just racist. That to me is a lot more interesting, because that to me showcases that there is another perspective to this, and that if a motherfucker is going to get poisoned and torn apart by alligators, I can at least know the reason as to why, rather than just, oh, the guy died because he was proclaimed to be an asshole, which the original Hell's Gulf did a lot with near the end. As for my second mixed aspect, it's mainly due to the fact that this is just an ebook. I don't like technology, and I know that could be contradicting. You'd be like, Rex, you're on YouTube, you're on the internet right now, you're making videos. What do you mean you don't like the internet? I don't like the internet. Just because I do something in regards to something doesn't mean that I actually like what I'm doing, right? There's aspects to what I do like to do that I don't like to do as well. Like, for example, if I want to make a video, I like filming myself making the video. I like doing all this. I like being able to put this together. I don't actually like the editing process of having to get all the clips and placing them all into the spot that I wanted. That part bores me a lot. And in the same vein, if I can read a book in hand, I much prefer that than to pull up my laptop and just read it on the technological aspect and just, you know, click a button every time. That unnecessary to me, you know. It's unnecessary technology. There's technology in this world that I think is very useful, and then there's technology that is just completely useless and unnecessary. Ebook, completely, to me, is unnecessary. Now, with those mixed aspects out of the way, I can get to my actual problems with this book. The main problem that I have with the book is that the characters are not that intriguing or interesting to me. And I know it's a common trope with the Hell's Gulfians, that the Hell's Gulfians are like the worst kind of people, and so obviously you're gonna get the worst kind of like characters. But even in that aspect, I just don't find any of the characters that interesting, especially the village of people. They just felt like a plot device for Lance to be able to be safe when he needs to be safe, and to be able to go forward when he needs to go forward. Like, every time something like major happens, either the village people come and save him, or the monsters go and attack the village people. And so it becomes this common trope. And why I defer a trope from an actual like character arc is if the characters are actually, you know, fleshed out, which I didn't feel like the villagers were fleshed out at all. Even Ramira, who was like a much more sympathetic daughter of this village head leader, she was just generic to me, very bland, very expected. Oh, the one daughter, the one person who's like feels for this outsider because, you know, she wants to be an outsider too. She wants to explore and get away from these rules. And it just felt very bland, especially when there's not much character depth to them other than those, you know, typical tropes. Every time I found myself reading a standard villager scene, I found myself extremely bored and looking at the page number every single time. Whenever the villagers popped up, I'm thinking to myself, damn, can these fuckers just shut up already, or at least be more interesting? Because holy shit, those pages felt longer than the fucking action pages. I would breeze through the action pages like that. I'd get through like 30 pages in like 20 minutes. But then you get to the villager pages and I get through like, what, 8 pages, and it took me a whole hour? That's crazy. And on that topic, the pacing I felt like with the story was very off-putting, where the story starts off with this very direct notion of what the story should be. And then once the monsters get involved, it gets like very quick, it moves very quickly, gets into all these different action scenes. We need to get to this point, and then after we deal with Captain Mulligan Taupe, it feels like the story once again just kind of comes to a halt, and things just slow down once again as we're doing this whole like, all right, we need to go see this person, we need to go see this person. Oh look, it's that one monster that I seen. We're not gonna touch him right now. We got to go to this next person, and then it speeds up again. It's like, okay, now he's dying. Now he has to do this. Now he turns into a monster, and now the villagers are about to get fucked up by this townspeople. I don't like that kind of pacing because to me it feels very inconsistent to what I want to be able to feel. If you're going to go from slow to fast, you need to be able to transition slow to fast and fast to slow in a way that can feel natural. Otherwise, it's going to feel like all these different plot points are either being rushed or are either being dragged out way too much. And that's how I felt with the villagers. For the villager stuff and the journey that Lance goes on with the mansion and stuff, it feels like they were dragging that on way too long. But then when we actually got to the action, it felt like it was so quick that I didn't really even get to enjoy it. Like Prism, one of the main villains, he gets fucked up in like the first 60 pages or so.
Fuck you! Is that all?
He's dead already, and it's like, well, damn, I didn't even get to enjoy Prism. I don't even know Prism's personality because the guy died so quickly. I only know that he thought he was the destroyer of realities, or the converter of reality? I don't know, something like that. And on that notion, Lance as a main protagonist felt devoid of personality. He felt bland, very bland, more bland than I felt with Rowan. At least with Rowan in Hell's Gulf, he had a character arc that revolved around his family. His family were the central theme of his self-discovery, and the things that he went through in Hell's Gulf were to self-discover himself in regards to helping out his family. In this story, when it came to Lance's main plotline, it felt like the story didn't exactly know what they wanted Lance to do. At first, his journey is to find this missing bird in Hell's Gulf, but then it changes completely to a different goal of like, well, now I'm here, you know, I might as well do whatever I want, and then he gets fucked up by the monsters, and now he wants to fuck up all the monsters, and then he doesn't know what the fuck he wants to do because now he wants to die, and it just feels like at no point in time did Lance nor the story truly know what to do with him. And every time they try to make him like emotional or sympathetic in some way, where he has these moments where he'll call up his family and be like, hey, you know, I know a lot of life things have been going on, or he has like the breakdown, seeing the tribe people getting fucked up. I never felt anything because Lance as a person, he never felt interesting at all, because every time that we stray away from those emotional scenes, we go back to the bland Lance, where he's just walking around. He's like, all right, I need to do my next task. Okay, I'm here. I'm doing the task. Okay, goodbye. And never once do I feel like he had a compelling character arc. Even with the backstory that they give him, with about him being adopted and about him being in this orphanage and falling in love with these birds because of what happened with the birds, and then seeing the baby birds die. Never once did it feel like that was really tied in with the actual story at play, with his actual character being developed. I never felt like his character was developed. It felt like whenever the story needed him to be a certain way, it just made him a certain way. If he needed to be emotional, they just made him emotional. If he needed to be a badass, they just made him a badass. If he needed to be sympathetic, they just made him sympathetic. Never once did it feel like Lance himself was actually feeling those kind of emotions. It felt like the story was just making him feel that way. And on that notion, the story in it of itself is nothing really new or fresh or unique for something that I would want to see. Now, I've already gone on notion to say that I'm not a big fan of prequel stories, because I feel like prequel stories are completely unnecessary. You know, they're telling me things that I already know, or at least should know, and I say that the only time that a prequel story would really work if it focuses on something completely different, yet it ties in really well with what the actual story is. And whilst I respect the fact that the story did do something completely different, it didn't feel like it tied in with the first book's story at all, let alone did it feel like it tied in with the whole Hell's Gulf concept that well. It felt like this concept that we've been focusing in on was more about the story of what the hell we doing with Lance until the book kind of just ends. And even the book itself treats itself as that, because by the end of the book, it just feels like, once again, a lackluster ending, where I don't think many things really get resolved, and the things that do get resolved are not satisfying caring in the slightest. Like for the 6 remaining living villagers, which yeah, Captain Mulligan Tope, he fucked up a lot of motherfuckers, that were still alive, it felt like they just were kind of like thrown out of the story, just like, alright, now y'all are free, go, live your life, and then they just ran away, and then they came across this one maid who was a part of this one storyline of the mansion, and she's like, oh, can I come with you too? It's like, yeah, sure, why not? Blah, 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 goodbye. No proper, like, send-off there. It just felt like, okay, they need to leave, goodbye. Then they ran off. Then with Cohen, who is this talking parrot who's been helping Lance throughout this whole story, he didn't know what the hell he wanted to do. You know, once Lance leaves as this bird form or disappears or whatever the fuck happens to Lance, who the fuck knows. Cohen is just there and he's just like, well, maybe I might do something with my life. And considering the fact that he's not in Hell's Gulf, I guess he did move on to bigger, better things, but he never felt like he's like, oh yeah, it's time for me to actually go across the sea. It never felt grand or special to me. Most of the townsfolk that were going to fuck up these villagers kind of just got shied away by Lance in his monster form in almost the same fashion as Hell's Gulf, but a lot less chaotic. And in a way, whilst the chaoticness I had a problem with in Hell's Gulf because some people who I didn't think deserved to die died, here it was kind of the opposite, where it's like those characters that clearly you would think that Lance would fuck up didn't get fucked up, and they just kind of got to get free without any kind of consequence for them to just show up in the first Hell's Gulf book. And yet one of the people who did get a consequence, who was one of the murderers, was somebody who could have actually be redeemable. He was somebody who actually wanted to be redeemed. He was somebody who felt guilty about what he did, and he seeked for Lance to be able to redeem himself, to be able to have forgiveness in him. And yet what does the story do? Well, at the end of the story, he dies. He gets fucked up by a bird creature and he dies. Because why not? Yes, the one redeemable character who could have actually done good. Since he doesn't show up in Hell's Gulf, gotta get rid of him. And the book in and of itself didn't feel warranted at all. It didn't feel like this book needed to be made. And even the book itself didn't feel like it wanted to be made, because by the end of the book, all that was concluded is that all of the townsfolk got their memories erased. And I have a problem with that. When it comes to the whole erase the mind aspect, to give into perspective, I'll put Spider-Man No Way Home as an example. With Spider-Man No Way Home, with Spider-Man making everybody forget who he is so that he can be able to move on and get, separated from the Avengers and do his own thing. The thing about that is that Spider-Man actually moves forward. He doesn't try and go back and be like, hey Ned, MJ, you remember I'm Peter Parker and maybe y'all should know at least who I am as Spider-Man, to essentially render the movie useless or pointless, but rather it pushes Spider-Man's arc forward to where even though all these people forget who he is, now Peter gets to continue his story onward. But with the God Tide, with every townsfolk forgetting except for the people who are not going to return in the actual Hell's Gulf book, it renders the book pointless, because now anything from the God Tide obviously doesn't carry over to Hell's Gulf, which makes it so clear and blatantly obvious that this is a story just made just to be made. And the only reason why we don't know nothing about the God Tide is because everyone had their memory wiped. It's so cliche and so pointless. It's like, why even make that be the story then? Why didn't you just make a proper sequel and make this after the events? Is it because the certain characters who are in Hell's Gulf eventually take over and rule the town now? And speaking of that, characters from Hell's Gulf, like the actual main characters from Hell's Gulf, they don't appear here in the God Tide to do jack shit. The family that eventually loses like the son, and the mother's like this witch doctor lady, and then the older son, he eventually becomes the sheriff of the town, the new sheriff, and he runs Hell's Gulf back upward. Well, they don't show up at all, and the story doesn't even render them as if they did exist because of the whole racism angle. So apparently everyone in Hell's Gulf now is just white, and that family is not there, despite the fact that that family has been there for a long time. And then with Luska, she shows up for a cameo earlier in the book and then proceeds to do absolutely nothing this entire story, which begs the question, why? Why didn't she try to seduce Lance? Why did she seduce Rowan in Hell's Gulf but not Lance, despite the fact it's the same exact scenario that we had before? Why did we not hear anything about Nathaniel trying to be seduced by Luska? And speaking of Nathaniel, I felt like Nathaniel's whole arc fizzled out into complete nothingness, where they're building up this Nathaniel character as this dragon monster now because he was a little boy when he got shot, but he was also doing criminal things because people influenced him to do bad things. And then by the time that Lance is about to die from echidna, and he's like, no, I'm not gonna bring in the dragon plotline, just throw it away. it means nothing now. It served no purpose, no more. Lance didn't become the dragon, Lance became a bird creature, and that was the end of that. Nothing, like, closure-wise, there's no conclusion there. Throw it away, that's the end of that. Echidna got killed unceremoniously. Goodbye, Echidna. You know, she birthed the monster killed her. Done. Finished. Goodbye. And Sheriff Crowley, who is supposed to protect Luska, but has been shown to be very protective of, like, no one should know anything about monsters, does absolutely nothing this whole story. He shows up for a few interrogations here and there. He's like, that one kid, okay. I'm not gonna go investigate it though because it has nothing to do with Luska. So why even, like... I think the story could have still worked perfectly fine had it taken place after Hell's Gulf and, like, the events of what happened prior to Hell's Gulf, like maybe the King Tide Massacre, and then you can follow up with the sequel of, like, this is the fallout of what happened. That would have been personally just what I thought could have been better, because when it comes to things like this where you have characters who obviously are in Hell's Gulf and who obviously served a big purpose and then proceed to not do shit with them in this book simply because this book can't be just a straight follow-up, sequel, prequel, whatever. Otherwise, people won't really enjoy it all that much because they know what to expect. That, to me, is lazy writing. I'm not gonna lie to you. So, for me, from what I've concluded by reading both of these Hell's Gulf stories, is that whilst I do think that the idea and the concept of these stories is very intriguing, this concept of fear manifesting these monsters into reality and them fucking up this place, Hell's Gulf, I don't think the execution has yet been perfected, nor has it been utilized in a way that could be amazing, except for a few rare occasions here and there where the scenes for some reason take a badass turn and are fucking awesome. Overall, I don't think this story is for me. I'm sure there is a audience for this kind of story, but I do wish that if or when Nick ever makes another new book, and maybe it's not Hell's Gulf related, that I could hopefully expect some better writing, you know, some better storylines, some better concepts to be explored in much better ways. That's what I always hope for any writer, to be improve and to be better. But for now, I'm gonna have to also give this story the same rating that I gave the first Hell's Gulf story, and that is a 2.5 out of 5 stars. And to be perfectly honest with you, a whole star right there is simply because of Captain Mulligan Taupe and everything that happened with Captain Mulligan Taupe. Otherwise, I think this would have been like a 1.5 story personally. Not to say that it's a bad story, but it's not a story that I am intrigued by, nor interests me in any way, and it feels very bland. And every time that I feel like there could be a lot of strong potential in what could happen, it feels like what I eventually do get is hell of a lot more lackluster. And yeah, I guess you could blame me for that, for having like bigger expectations, but you know, when it comes to storytelling, my expectations are pretty high, man. With the amount of stories that exist out there, yeah, you bet your ass I'm gonna want and wish for better stories. So with that, I think that concludes the book review. Nick, my email still is the same. If you ever want to contact me or say anything about the review or this review, you can also say in the comments section. But you know, it's up to you, man, if you want to. And this is the part where Arex Mavioso shows up. Huh. I guess he didn't show up this time. Where is that clown anyway?
Will one of you fucking bastards open this fucking door already? I've been in here for fucking hours, you pieces of shit! Open this door!
Oh well. Arrivederci. You bitch ass motherfucker!